Let's talk about everyone's least favourite character in Warhammer 40k, Lucius the Eternal. And honestly, before I sat down and actually started reading about him, going through his books rather than just knowing him through meme lore and YouTube videos, I hated him too. I'd watched Mr. Bones' fantastic and very entertaining video on him, which you should definitely check out, but after you finish this, because I need the watch time. I'd read the first few Horus Heresy books, where Lucius spends half the time sulking about losing to Garviel Loken, and the other half betraying Saul Tarvit, and I was fully ready to jump on the Lucius hate bandwagon. But here's the thing, the more I dug into him, the more I started to appreciate him. He's absolutely not my favourite character, not even close, but I realised Lucius the Eternal is actually way more interesting than a lot of people give him credit for. He's still an awful person, don't get me wrong, he's definitely written to be hated, but he's awful in a way that fits the setting and its themes perfectly. So, before we talk about why I like the guy so much, I suppose we should go over who exactly Lucius is, and why he's so hated by the community. Lucius the Eternal is the current, and probably permanent, champion of Slaanesh. During the Horus Heresy and the 10 millennia after, each of the 4 Chaos Gods chose a mortal champion to represent them across the galaxy. Khorne chose Kharn the Betrayer, partly because their names are basically exactly the same with a few letters mixed around, and partly because Khorne is generally all about big, strong, muscly hunks. Nurgle went with Callus Typhon, now known as Typhus, the first captain of the Death Guard, who was responsible for infecting his legion with the Destroyer Plague that brought them over to serve the God of Decay. Tzeentch picked Ahriman, the most powerful sorcerer of the Thousand Sons, who performed the rubric to save his legion from the flesh change, but ended up turning them to dust in the process, and has spent the last 10 millennia searching for a way to reverse it. And finally, Slaanesh chose Lucius, a sexy little twink who's good with a sword, and who the Dark Prince seems to keep around, mostly because they find him amusing. Born on Chemos, although after Fulgrim had reorganised it into a slightly less nightmarish place to live, young Lucius won the Golden Sword Contest, a yearly tournament held by the planet's elders, and from there was chosen by the 3rd Legion of Spacemarines for recruitment. Unsurprisingly, he fit right in, quickly gaining a reputation for preening arrogance and throwing himself into fights purely to prove his superiority. He was also deeply insecure about his looks, mocked by fellow warriors for being a pretty boy, even by the standards of the Emperor's children. After Garviel Loken broke his perfect nose in a duel, Lucius began cutting scars into his own flesh, an early sign of the chaos, corruption and masochism that would come to define him. During his time with the Legion, Lucius formed a strong bond with Saul Tarvitz, a fellow captain. The older Marines' level-headed council complimented Lucius's petulance, helping him see his flaws for what they were and pushing him to work on them, though not enough to change his fate. At the start of the Horus Heresy, he fought alongside the Loyalists on Istvan III, before deciding they weren't giving him enough praise and betraying them to the traitors. He killed Solomon Demeter, a hero of the Emperor's children, and duelled his former comrade Tarvit. From there, he sank deeper into madness and Slaaneshi corruption, obsessing over becoming the perfect swordsman, and proving his martial prowess in the honour duels and tournaments that Fulgrim organised to keep himself entertained. Lucius's big gimmick is a curse Slaanesh laid upon him after his death during one of these tournaments, at the hands of the Lord Commander of the Emperor's children, Cyrus. Whenever he is killed, and his killer feels pride about that kill, Lucius slowly begins to possess them, taunting them from inside their mind as they fall ill, scars appearing across their body, until one day they collapse. Out pops Mr. Eternal, and all that's left of his killer is a screaming soul trapped inside his armour. As far as war gear goes, he wields the Lash of Torment, another gift from Slaanesh, inhabited by a demonette and able to move independently from Lucius, constricting anyone who gets close, suffocating them and cutting them to pieces, while projecting the pain and fear its victims are suffering to anyone nearby. Predictably, any followers of Slaanesh absolutely love this, while those who aren't complete degenerates have been known to flee in terror when forced to experience their comrade's pain. In addition to his kinky demon whip, Lucius bears the Laren Blade, the demon blade inhabited by a greater demon that caused Fulgrim's fall to chaos during the heresy. After the demon was freed from the sword and possessed Fulgrim, it would gift the now empty sword to Lucius. Without the essence of the demon, the sword lost much of its power, yet it remains an incredibly well-made power sword, and in Lucius's hands it can be devastating, which, so far, sounds pretty cool. He's decked out with high-quality war gear, and his gimmick is, in itself, a fun trait for a villain, and very on-brand for Slaanesh. So why do people hate him? Unfortunately, as with most things Chaos, the rules for his reanimation process aren't as clear-cut as I made them sound. Instead of needing his killer to feel pride, Slaanesh will essentially allow Lucius to be reborn as long as he remains entertaining, which leads to things like Lucius resurrecting inside an engineer after stepping on a landmine, so someone who hadn't even met him to take pride in killing him, or inside a Necron, which is insane because Necrons are emotionless robots who are literally incapable of feeling pride. The second reason people seem to hate him is that he's also incredibly arrogant, which is par for the course as far as the Emperor's children go. They were the perfectionists of the legions, and Chaos twisted that into narcissistic hedonism. But Lucius takes it a step further, genuinely believing he's the greatest duelist in the galaxy, despite the proof to the contrary being on his armour at all times. So yeah, he's immortal in a way that feels cheap and low stakes, which makes him hard to write effectively, and his smug, childish dick-headedness is understandably annoying, which is fair enough. Lucius is a villain, he is designed and written to be hated, so it makes sense people could write him off as an annoying, broken character. But if that's the case, why do I like him so much? Let's get one thing clear right away. Lucius is an immensely powerful duelist. Even by the standards of 40k, where good with a sword means you can take on entire squads of space marines at once, he's exceptional. During the landmine story I mentioned earlier, the engineer that created the mine was only the 7th face on his armour. Running around the galaxy for 10 millennia, constantly seeking out the toughest opponents you can find in a desperate race for perfection, and only being beaten 7 times is pretty impressive. The man 1v1'd a bloodthirster and won, which, yeah, isn't as big a deal in the current day of the setting as it should be, but that's a discussion for another time. The issue is that the only way for an author to demonstrate Lucius's resurrection ability is to have him die, which can, and has, led to him being defined by that very thing, even though it's one of the least interesting facets of his character. See, I love the tragic characters in 40k. The Blood Angels are my favourite legion because of their inevitable fall to the Red Thirst and Black Rage, and I adore the World Eaters, with the Butcher's Nails corrupting their original role as noble warriors into bloodthirsty berserkers. And Lucius fits this too. Despite his gimmick being regarded as a consequence-free, get-out-of-jail-free card, that's not actually true. Though you might think that being transformed into a giant half-goat, half-snake monstrosity sounds pretty bad for Lucius's killer, it's not actually them who suffers the most. Lucius is, to me, the epitome of the harm that Slaaneshi corruption causes to her worshippers. Every soul that is subsumed into the armour of Shrieking Souls, which is a badass name by the way, is also within Lucius's mind, constantly screaming unintelligibly at him, taunting him and goading him. He's trapped with these constant reminders of his past failures, coming from the souls of people who, by the very nature of how they got there, Lucius can never have a rematch with, and thereby prove himself better than. These souls are not only pushing Lucius deeper into madness and driving him further on his path to perfection, they're also slowly gaining control of his body, to the point that in one of his books, the souls within his armour prevent his arm from moving and force him to lose a duel to a Khornate's champion. Despite that, Lucius is forever learning from his mistakes and failures, drawing on the wisdom and experience his previous killers possessed to become an even deadlier warrior. After 10,000 years of fighting, dying, learning and growing, Lucius is truly one of the greatest warriors in the setting, even though you might not think that based on the memes. I think people like to fixate on his resurrection gimmick because, as it's written, it has quite a few loopholes. For example, what if someone killed Lucius, began to turn, and then placed themselves in an inescapable trap? But I think that misses the point of him, and the reason that Slaanesh lets him resurrect so often in the first place. Lucius knows he can't truly die, and takes advantage of that by pushing himself to find better and better opponents, while handicapping himself in increasingly ridiculous ways. As someone on Reddit put it, his more interesting gimmick is that he's a guy perpetually trying to do the equivalent of 360 no-scope kills with his sword, because he's essentially unbeatable when he fights seriously. There's also the misconception that Lucius dying so much means he always loses, when that's really not the case. In the Hammer and Bolter episode about Lucius, you see him use his ability to infiltrate a fortress he wouldn't be able to sneak into otherwise. He draws out its defenders, lets himself be killed by one of them, and then possesses them to sneak his way inside. Yes, he lost a duel, but not because he's a poor fighter, but because he knows how his resurrections work and uses them to his advantage. So, he's capable but full of hubris, evil but full of charm. Narcissistic egos, fragile confidence, and violent tantrums are so fundamentally Slaaneshi to me, and Lucius is a physical embodiment of his fallen legion's traits taken to their most destructive extreme. The suffering he's subjected to as a result of his curse really justifies why a god as capricious as Slaanesh would keep him around, and transforms it from a low-stakes gimmick into a truly tragic punishment for his fall to chaos. He strives for perfection, fails, suffers, and repeats forever. One quote in particular from his books really stuck with me, and was the catalyst for my opinion changing as drastically as it did. For a bit of backstory, Lucius's ship is captained by a Slaaneshi demon named Clarion, who inhabits the body of a young girl. Lucius was kidnapped by Fabius Bile, working with a group of Drukhari, and sent to the Webway, when Clarion followed him in to rescue him. When asked why, she said, "Because of you, Lucius. You fall, you rise, you continue on, refusing to believe your failures until once more they strike you down. You return, slowly diminishing, but unwilling to stop, unwilling to succumb. You are your race, Lucius. You are humanity." Despite being estranged from his demon dad, Lucius still clings to one of Fulgrim's earliest teachings, that the path to perfection is paved with failures, and that one cannot achieve true perfection without failing, admitting to that failure, and growing from it. All of this makes Lucius an incredibly interesting character, admittedly one that's difficult to like, whether by design or not. His resurrection ability doesn't make sense, sure, but it's a chaos curse, in a setting full of 8-foot-tall sentient mushroom men. 40k as a setting is designed to be bombastic and over the top, and it doesn't always make sense. The important thing for Lucius's ability, to me, is that it provides a compelling story, which, hopefully, I've demonstrated that it does. Lucius is definitely the victim of memes becoming more popular than the character himself, or at least the books about him. To most people who aren't super into the lore, Lucius is just a cheap character who loses a lot but never faces consequences, which is something I definitely don't blame anyone for, and I'm also absolutely guilty of repeating meme lore myself. In my last video on Russ, for example, I mentioned a few things about him that aren't exactly accurate, but if you can look past the memes, I think Lucius really is a great thematic character who can stand alongside the other Chaos Champions as a tragic reminder of how far the traitor legions have fallen. Beyond that, he also just has some really fun moments in his books and animations. He's definitely not likeable, and he's certainly not a good person, but in a setting built on extremes, he's exactly what he needs to be. A perfect, awful, tragic tale of Slaaneshi corruption. He's the embodiment of the Emperor's children's fall from grace, the ultimate cautionary tale of chasing perfection until it destroys you, and then forces you to start all over again. If you've watched this far in the video, thank you so much. It really does mean a lot. I've tried a few different things for this video, especially the tone of the script and some post-processing steps in Audacity that I don't understand. So if you have any notes about any of that, please let me know in the comment. Like, subscribe, all the rest, and I'll see you in the next video.